If you've ever lain awake at night doing math in your head, watching the same numbers circle like moths around a lamp, adding what you owe, subtracting what you earn, and never once landing on a total that lets you close your eyes in peace, this story is for you. Because the number was never really the problem. What kept you awake was something older than arithmetic, something that lives underneath every bank statement you've ever opened with a tight chest. Today, I want to tell you about a merchant who owned more than anyone in his province, and who still went to sleep every night feeling poor. He built a fortune that could have fed 100 families. He built it, and it was never enough. There was a night, though, when an old monk asked him a single question, and the merchant's answer to that question, just 7 words, became the thing his grandchildren still repeat to this day. We'll get to those 7 words. But first, you need to understand how a man with everything came to feel like he had nothing. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, what's the one money number that follows you everywhere? The one you do the math on even when you're trying to fall asleep. You might be surprised how many people carry the exact same one. His name was Tarek, and he lived in a trading town built where 2 rivers met, back when a man's wealth was measured in grain stores and camel trains rather than numbers on a screen. Tarek had started with nothing. His father had died owing money to 3 different lenders, and Tarek had spent his 20s paying off debts that weren't even his, working from before sunrise until after the last lamp in the market went dark. He remembered exactly what it felt like to be hungry, to count coins twice because he couldn't believe there were so few of them, to lie on a straw mat and calculate how many days he had left before the debt collectors came again. That memory never left him. It moved into his chest and stayed there even after everything changed. And everything did change. By the time Tarek was 40, he owned the largest warehouse in the river town, 6 ships that carried silk and spice along the coast, and more grain stores than he could count on a single walk through his own property. Other merchants came to him for loans. Children in the market pointed him out to their parents. He had done, by any outside measure, exactly what he'd set out to do. He had escaped hunger forever. Except he hadn't escaped it. Not really, because the boy who once counted his coins twice had simply grown into a man who counted his warehouses twice, and his ships twice, and his gold twice, always looking for the number that would finally let him rest. Every time he reached a sum he thought would satisfy him. The satisfaction lasted about as long as it took to count it. Then a new fear moved in to take its place. Not the fear of hunger anymore, but the fear of loss. What if the ships sank? What if the harvest failed? What if the neighboring merchant undercut his prices and took his customers? The size of his fear had grown exactly as fast as the size of his fortune. His wife noticed it before anyone else did. She would find him at his ledgers long after the household had gone to sleep, a single oil lamp burning low, his finger tracing the same columns of numbers he had already added 3 times that day. She asked him once, gently, why a man who owned 6 ships still worked like a man who owned none. He didn't have an answer. He just kept adding. His son noticed it too, though in a quieter way. The boy had grown up watching his father count things, grain sacks, coins, the days until a ship was due, and had learned, without anyone teaching him directly, that this was simply what a serious man did. He would sit beside Tarek some evenings, watching the columns of numbers grow, and ask what they were for. Tarek never had a satisfying answer. "So we're safe," he'd say, and the boy would nod as though that explained something, even though neither of them could have said what safety would actually look like once it finally arrived. It was a strange kind of inheritance to pass down, not the warehouses themselves, but the restlessness underneath them. But what he didn't know was that an old monk had been watching him for years, from the edge of the market, where he sat each morning with an empty wooden bowl and asked for nothing more than what the day would bring him. The monk owned, as far as anyone could tell, exactly 3 things: his robe, his bowl, and a walking staff worn smooth by decades of use. And strangely, of every person in that market, the wealthy and the poor, the anxious and the content, the monk was the only one who slept without dreaming of numbers. Tarek had passed him 1,000 times without truly seeing him. That's the thing about a man consumed by counting. He stops noticing anything that can't be counted. Then came the year the ships didn't return on schedule. A storm off the southern coast had delayed the whole fleet by nearly 2 months, and for those 2 months, Tarek did not sleep more than a few hours a night. He walked the docks before dawn, staring at an empty horizon, recalculating his losses hour by hour, even though there was nothing new to calculate. His warehouse manager begged him to rest. His wife begged him to eat. Tarek couldn't hear either of them. All he could hear was the sound of numbers falling away from him, one imagined disaster at a time. He started keeping a second ledger during those weeks, one he never showed anyone, where he wrote out what he stood to lose if each ship had gone down, and then what he stood to lose if 2 had gone down, and then all 6. He did this most nights, not because the numbers ever changed, but because writing them down felt for a moment like doing something instead of simply waiting. It never once made him feel better. It only ever made the fear more specific, gave it sharper edges to hold on to. Looking back later, he would understand that this was the clearest picture anyone could have painted of what accumulation actually does to a mind that never learned to stop. It doesn't protect you from loss. It just gives you more ways to imagine it before it happens. And this is where everything changed. On the 40th night of waiting, unable to sleep, Tarek walked out past the edge of the market, past the shuttered stalls, and found the old monk sitting exactly where he always sat, even though there was no one left to give him anything at that hour. Tarek, half out of desperation and half out of something he couldn't name, sat down across from him in the dirt. "You have nothing," Tarek said. It wasn't a question so much as an accusation, the words of a man looking for someone to be more afraid than he was. "You own nothing. How do you sleep? Remember this detail. It matters later." The monk did not answer right away. He simply looked at Tarek for a long moment, the way you might look at someone you've been waiting to speak to for a very long time. "I don't own nothing," the monk finally said. "I own exactly enough." Tarek laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Enough for what? A bowl and a robe? I have 6 ships out there that might be at the bottom of the ocean right now, and you're telling me about your bowl." "Then you don't have 6 ships," the monk said quietly. "You have a fear shaped like 6 ships." Those words landed somewhere Tarek couldn't immediately locate, but they landed hard. He sat with them in the dark, saying nothing, while the monk waited without any apparent need to fill the silence. "I built all of this so I would stop being afraid," Tarek finally admitted, and it was the first time he had said the sentence out loud, maybe even the first time he had let himself think it clearly. "I built it because I was hungry once, and I swore I would never be hungry again." "And are you still hungry?" the monk asked. Tarek opened his mouth to say, "No, of course not. Look at everything I have," and then stopped. Because the honest answer, the one his body already knew even if his mind had been avoiding it for 20 years, was yes. He was hungrier than he had ever been. Not for food, for a number that didn't exist. A number large enough to finally silence the boy on the straw mat, who was still, somewhere inside him, counting coins in the dark. "May I ask you something?" Tarek said, his voice smaller than he intended it to be. "You have nothing but a bowl. If it were stolen tomorrow, what would you have?" This was the moment. The question Tarek asked without knowing he was asking the question that would define the rest of his life. The monk didn't hesitate. "Enough," he said. 7 words followed, spoken so plainly they almost passed by unnoticed. "I would still have enough left over." Tarek sat with that for a long time. Enough left over. Not because the monk owned reserves hidden somewhere, not because he had a second bowl waiting, but because his sense of having enough had never been built on the bowl in the first place. It had been built somewhere the storm couldn't reach it. The ships came in 3 days later, all 6 of them, cargo intact, crew exhausted but alive. Tarek's fortune on paper hadn't changed by a single coin from what it had been the night he sat in the dirt with the monk, but something else had shifted, something no ledger could record, and it changed the way he lived for the rest of his life. Here is what that old story is actually about. Once you set aside the ships and the market and the robe, it's about the difference between accumulation and sufficiency, and almost no one is taught to tell them apart. Accumulation asks a question that can never be answered. How much is enough? It keeps moving the target every time you get close because it isn't actually measuring wealth. It's measuring safety from an old fear, and fear doesn't respond to numbers. You can throw 1,000 coins at fear and it just asks for 1,000 more. Sufficiency asks a completely different question. what do I actually need to be at peace right now? And that question, unlike the first one, has an answer, a real one you can reach. That merchant is you. Every time you check your account and feel a flicker of relief, followed almost immediately by a new worry about what could still go wrong. That merchant is you. Every time a number that would have thrilled you 5 years ago now barely registers because the target quietly moved again without you noticing. The tragedy isn't wanting more. Wanting is human. The tragedy is mistaking the wanting for the wound and trying to close a wound with more of the very thing that never once managed to heal it before. The monk wasn't wealthy because he had less to lose. He was at peace because his peace had never been wired to the bowl in the first place. That's the part most people miss when they hear this story and think the lesson is about giving everything away. It isn't. Tarek didn't sell his ships. He kept every one of them. What he gave up was something invisible. The belief that the next number would finally be the one that let him rest. So what do you actually do with this? Not someday. Tonight. First, before you sleep tonight, write down 3 things money cannot buy that you already own. Not things you hope to have, things you already hold right now tonight. A person who checks on you. A body that, however tired, carried you through today. A mind still capable of learning something new tomorrow. Write them by hand if you can. Let your eyes rest on them for a full minute before you turn off the light. Second, the next time you check a balance, a savings account, an investment, a number on a screen, pause for 3 breaths before you react to it. In those 3 breaths, ask yourself one honest question. Am I reacting to the number, or am I reacting to an old fear wearing the number's clothing? You don't have to answer it perfectly. You just have to ask. Third, choose one small concrete amount, however modest, and set it aside this week for something that gives without any return attached to it. Not an investment, not a purchase, not anything that comes back to you. A gift with no strings given quietly. This isn't about generosity as a strategy to attract more. It's about proving to the frightened part of you that there is enough to give something away and still be safe. Picture the monk now, years later, still sitting at the edge of that same market as the light goes gold over the rooftops. His bowl resting empty beside him, in no hurry for the evening to end or the next morning to arrive. There is nothing dramatic about the image. That's exactly the point. Peace rarely looks dramatic. It looks like a man with an empty bowl, unafraid of the dark. And somewhere in that same town, an old merchant, wealthier than he'd ever been, still walked his docks some evenings, but no longer to count what might be lost. He walked them simply because he liked the sound of the water. He had learned, late but not too late, that his fortune had never been the thing keeping him awake. His fear had been. And fear, once you see it clearly, standing in the dark wearing your own numbers as a disguise, begins, slowly, imperfectly, to loosen its grip. If this story is true for anyone, it's true for you. The number was never going to be the one that finally let you rest. Enough was never a sum you had to reach. It was a decision you were always free to make. If this story gave you even one moment of peace tonight, there are more waiting for you here. Next time, I'll tell you about the king who traded his crown for a single afternoon of rest and what he asked for in return when the afternoon was over. Until then, walk gently, hold loosely.